Shall I?
Yeah.
Okay. So we will start this third and last series of conversation organized by the Ireland and Portugal Business Network about investing and hiring in Portugal. I would like to start by welcoming you all and thanking you for being here. As I mentioned, this is the third conversation. The first one was with Miguel Fontes from Startup Lisboa, the CEO of Startup Lisboa. It was about the startup ecosystem, the opportunities, the trends, and also about the hub Creative to Beato, which will be the largest innovation, creativity, and technology hub in Europe that is under development in Lisbon. A very interesting conversation. The second and very interesting conversation also was with Alexandre Barbosa, founder and managing partner of Faber Venture. That one was more focused on the Portuguese innovation scene with a special focus on venture capital. Very two good conversations. To anyone that could not see these conversations live or is interested in returning to them, they are available at the IPBN YouTube page. I returned to see them and they're very, very interesting. I would also like, before we start, to take this opportunity to recognize and highlight the great support that the Ireland-Portugal Business Network has been benefiting from a certain partners, for their executive partners, A-Green and Dancer, but also, and very importantly, the Irish Embassy, that's been supporting the IPBN from day one. Very strong support on daily activity, on highlighting, on helping us grow this network, and I'd like to thank them for that. Also to all speakers and moderators from the series of conversation for their time and participation here, to all the partners in that help here in Portugal and also in Ireland to promote this series of conversation, such as Startup Lisboa, Invest Lisboa, ICET, the Dublin Chamber and the Tech Ireland, and a special thanks to the IPBN members that also help promote and help create this, such as Bridgin, that we are having this conversation today with the CEO, Global Shares, and Furnished.com. They help us with the content of this session specifically. My name is Diogo. I'm a board member of the Ireland and Portugal Business Network, but I'm also project director at Invest Lisboa. Invest Lisboa is a Lisbon investment promotion agency. It's a partnership between the Lisbon municipality and the Chamber of Commerce and Industry here in Portugal, which is a private association. And we have also the support of ICEP, and which is the National Economic Development Agency, and Baía do Tejo. Sorry. So we have two main objectives, two main goals. One is to promote Lisbon abroad as an investment destination. And we talk to investors, we talk to companies, we talk to talent people, which is the subject of this conversation today. And we talk to entrepreneurs, all trying to promote Lisbon as a location to be in. But we also support these same people, investors, companies, entrepreneurs, throughout their decision-making process, with information, with talking one-to-one about their projects, what their need, what their driver is, and trying to understand if Lisbon makes sense for these projects to develop here. And if they decide to come to Lisbon, we keep on supporting their operations here, mainly by providing information, sharing our network, our partners. Bridgin is one of our important partners. They do a very important and interesting job here in Lisbon. We will talk about it later. And we have this goal. The Ireland-Portugal Business Network mission is, as the name somehow hints, to promote a business network between Ireland and Portugal. I don't have to tell you because most of us here are Portuguese and Irish, so we know the importance of community. So we know that it helps build proximity, develop more and closer business relationships. The IPBN also helps to create synergies, facilitate cooperation, and in the end, helps each member to be more informed, more connected, and therefore overcoming any normal difficulty that companies might have while addressing different markets. So I think it's very interesting project. That's one of the reasons I'm very, very happily contributing to it. If you want to know more about the network, please visit the website www.ireland-portugal.com or subscribe to the LinkedIn page, which will help you to be very informed about the activities of the network and its members as well. Now, just one last message before we start. Please enter the discussion anytime by posting questions, comments on the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on it, but for certain I will look at it in the end to extend this conversation to the people that is hearing. You can comment or ask not only about subject matter, but also any other matter regarding Lisbon and Portugal that you might think it's important, and we will try to give you some feedback from outside as well. So now, Pedro, I haven't mentioned a lot about Pedro Henriques on purpose. I think he has a very interesting story to tell. He started as a computer science background. He's been through many companies and responsibilities, but maybe I'll let Pedro tell us through. Can you take us through your path until you decide to create Bridgin?
Yeah, absolutely. Just before that, say hi everyone and tell how excited I am to join this conversation. I'm glad to join this series of events from Ireland and Portugal Business Network, and obviously follow great conversations like the one from Miguel Fontes, Startup Lisboa, and Alexandre Barbosa from Faber Ventures. Quickly on me, and jumping into then Bridgin. I'm, well, Pedro, obviously, founder and CEO at Bridgin. Indeed, software engineer by training, father of three, which has been a challenge with the pandemic, an interesting challenge, I may put it. I have indeed worked also as a senior manager in multiple companies, being the last one at private equity from Austin, Texas. Also taught at the local university, computer science, and all of that experience and deep knowledge about tech kind of made me realize what seems an interesting opportunity that I'm glad to say that has been working out quite well, both for us and our customers. And in a quick summary, what we do at Bridgin is we do help companies. They are focused on having somewhat of a decentralized organization that can take obviously many forms, but particularly we help them when they want to have a hub, a presence in Lisbon or Portugal. One of the areas we excel is we understand tech. I hired a lot of people, manage a lot of the delivery processes. And so it's all about that experience about what it is to scale a team of people. But also obviously with that, and particularly for companies and people that are not local, that have not been exposed obviously to all the legal, all the tax, boring, but yet necessary parts of life, to help them also with that, right? So make sure that companies can come here, they can remain fully compliant, they can follow all the laws. So that's quite important. More on the reason, and answering your question, why we did create Bridgin. So the opportunity it presented to me 2.5 years ago was to realize, and this is before the pandemic, now it feels obvious, right, that probably a lot of the jobs, particularly knowledge workers, don't need to be done necessarily on the office, at least on an office every day. I still think there is definitely room for collaborative sessions at the office, but maybe you don't necessarily need to be there all day. And this trend, as sometimes do happen, started outside Portugal first, and I would say also I feel it started strongly in North America, particularly also because they are obviously big countries. Business travel in North America, Canada, or the US can take many hours, right? And so if people can communicate and operate without necessarily traveling all the time, can add a little bit of efficiency. And that has caused that this way of working remotely or having decentralized, distributed teams, whatever you may want to call them, was growing, and this was growing obviously not just in the last year, but way before that. And so that was an interesting realization. Bridging that, pun intended, bridging, but bridging that with my own experience locally about the Portugal market was that, as I said, I started my career as a software developer, then solution architect, then manager of delivery centers and all of that. And I realized that even myself, personally speaking, I was kind of hitting, although I was working in big consultancy and pan-European companies, I was still hitting somewhat of a wall in terms of career progression, to be quite honest. And why? Because at the time, and we are talking 10 years ago, we did not have as much interest in Portugal as we have today, which obviously by the work of many different institutes, like yourself, Diogo, Lisboa, but many others, Portugal has been really on the radar now for a lot of companies. But that part is more recent. And when you see on one end companies that want to be more distributed, and then you look at Portugal, a market that you know, and feel that it is still undiscovered from a talent perspective, you think there's something here, right? And so what we realize is we want to help companies that want to get into Portugal to help them succeed. Okay. Obviously, there were stories in the past, sometimes more successful, sometimes less. But anyone that wants to come to a different country needs to understand the local culture, not just tax and legal, but also the culture, right? How it is to recruit people, how it is a good way to manage people, how we can match this culture with the other teams on the other sites in the world. So all of that is really important. And the knowledge about doing that in a scalable, predictable way, I think was the key area where we kind of decided to start operating, because indeed it's a great opportunity, but it's also an interesting challenge, obviously, to open operations elsewhere.
Okay. Well, you mentioned that you find that Portugal was attractive, especially for tech companies. What in your view and your experience are the main reasons that brought companies to Portugal, or why companies are signing up for Portugal? And the other way around as well, what are the main misconceptions that people outside have about Portugal that you have understood and have to correct about here? And maybe if you have some practical examples from your experience of why the reasons why companies are choosing Portugal.
So reasons why companies choose Portugal. Obviously this will be slightly different reasons depending on the country of origin. Okay, we at Bridgin, and obviously I'll have more stories and examples to share. We do traditionally focus more in both North America, US, Canada, but also the UK, Ireland, a little bit the Nordics, Switzerland. And the reason why that is, it's quite obvious. They are all places where tech is significant, and tech, not just tech companies, but particularly a lot of what you hear and everyone hears on the news, right? Startups that got significant funding and have significant scaling pains, right? They need to hire not one or two a year, they need to hire 20 or even 100 a year, right? So those significant scaling pains is the type of markets that we typically work most. But indeed, you will have other also very significant movement, for instance, from Brazil. We more recently also found an interesting movement from Central Europe that, well, happened in the past as well. But I think kind of started to see a few additional companies coming. Now, so different motivations for all. Let's start possibly with North America. I think that the biggest advantage there is obviously it's the other side of the pond, right? So when a company from North America starts growing and their domestic market is fairly big, but when they start getting customers internationally, maybe in Europe, obviously Europe as a whole is quite a big economy, right? It's a very important economy. But one of the key challenge there is that it is somewhat fragmented, although well, Portugal, Ireland, and a bunch of other countries obviously do belong to the European Union. We still have different languages, slightly different laws, although under kind of a common framework that we try to make things more or less similar, but it's still different, right? And there are still differences in culture. And that is something that for someone that comes from a bigger economy where things are more or less the same, it is a challenge. So you really have two ways of doing that. particularly if you need to have either sales or operations in the different countries. Do you want to go and open operations in every single country? Or do you want to maybe have one base, one hub, at least to start, and then try to serve from that base in Europe, the remaining countries in Europe? And that's where I really think Portugal excels, okay? And particularly for Western Europe. A lot of different questions. Number one, we are in fact the closest in terms of time zone, well, geographically speaking as well, to North America, right? So that's not to be considered. It is important. The second is English skills in Portugal are very, very high. We are amongst the highest, other than obviously the native speaking countries and the Nordics. We are right there, I think number 7 in Europe, or the world actually, which does compare very positively with other countries in South Europe. So that's number 2. And second, cultural speaking, Portugal, and anyone on the audience that knows anything about a little bit of Portugal history knows that we have always been looking towards the Atlantic, actually much more than inland into Europe, right? Historical reasons started 5 centuries ago. And thus we are very, very close culturally speaking also with both the Great Isles, the UK and Ireland, and also America, Canada and the US. And that makes easy for companies because they don't find a cultural gap. It's easy. And this is, by the way, feedback I got from companies and customers we are working with. I can give you this example. Please said that I don't share the company of the name, obviously, you know, a lot of NDAs and stuff, but they did mention to me, the CEO, that they have a team in Portugal that we've been helping them, and they have a team in Poland. And what they said is, look, there's good talent everywhere, obviously, right? But when I get out of the status meetings with the team in Portugal, we are all laughing, it's fun, we are happy. When I get out of the meeting with Poland, they are still professional, but I don't know, the cultural fit is not as good, right? So, and that for a lot of companies, and also again, particularly for a lot of fast growing tech startups, culture is very, very relevant. So that's yet again, another reason why Portugal is a reason why a lot of companies have chose Portugal and have been quite successful being here. Other reasons, and I'll also take that and then I'll jump to other. You also see, for instance, we had an event that obviously Diogo, you know about, with John Graham coming from Cloudflare, their CTO that is in Lisbon. And it was interesting to hear that their goal for Lisbon was necessarily not just hire obviously the local talent, but also have the ability that Portugal is an interesting place that can attract foreign people, right, in the Indian Europe, right? So you can easily, and I talked with many other providers or companies that said the same, you can pretty much easily tell to someone from, I don't know, Denmark, Sweden, or any other country in Europe, say, do you want to go work for us in Portugal? It's not a difficult proposition. Obviously, the country is quite sunny. It's the 3rd safest country in the world. The English skills we already talked about. The food, I think people typically enjoy it. So there's a lot of things also from a personal reason that makes that more attractive to tech companies, right? Because if it's attractive to their people, to the ability to hire people, it will be a good decision for them. Quickly, jumping into other parts of the world. So when I look, obviously the UK, the last few years have been particularly challenging with all the uncertainty and the Brexit and all of that. I feel that, and this is clearly noticeable in just the meetings I've been getting in the last few months, is we do see somewhat of an exodus from London, from a lot of expats, okay? So there were people that were probably not British to start with. They moved there because it's quite an important hub, but now they have restrictions to travel because being a US citizen or having a resident permit or whatever, it's not now the same as being in Europe, although obviously still fairly simple to travel. And so I see some of them to relocate to Portugal. So the same folks that chose London to have access to opportunity and progress their careers are now, a lot of them at least, choosing Portugal, and I'm sure other countries as well, to relocate because they can work from a actually slightly cheaper location, because Portugal, it is still cheaper than London and other countries. And so that's yet another reason. Talking about misconceptions, the last part. So I do think the probably the biggest one is when we say, and it is true, that Portugal is probably the most cost-effective location to hire talent and just have a living, your own expenses in Western Europe. Obviously, it is not the cheapest location in the world or even in Europe. There are locations in, sorry, I was saying Eastern, we are Western. There are locations in Eastern Europe, there will be cheaper, right? That talent and hiring people, tech or non-tech, it will be slightly cheaper. And so that's an important misconception, is that Portugal is not a low-cost destination. It's a cost-effective destination. There's a lot of qualities. There's a lot of good KPIs. And again, Diogo, I know you're always on top of this, so you know this, but Portugal has a lot of graduates in STEM, science, technology, math.
Second largest in Europe after Berlin per population.
Yeah, exactly. So although we don't have like a huge country, the huge amount of population, we really have really good education, really good rates in terms of graduates, right? So that is quite important. And what that means is, yeah, it's not, if you want to buy and build a delivery center at the cheapest cost, honestly, probably might not be the best location, but you really want to have a lot of value, people highly educated, people that can speak really good English, that have experience working in international companies, that have a very good cultural fit with most of the Western world. Portugal will be a key destination.
Okay, that's very interesting, and the differentiation you made from each country, and actually probably each sector have different different motivations. We have that experience as well here, but there's one thing that, especially in the last few years, that glues everything together, and I will share with you. When we started Invest Lisboa 10 years ago, most contacts that we had, the first questions of companies, the first question was it was about costs, and it was a cost-driven decision, and you attracted lots of share service center, contact center, share service center, etc. In the last 5 years or so, that shifts completely, and the question is always about talent availability. Can I find there, or can I attract to Lisbon or to Portugal? I'm sorry about talking, this is about Portugal, but my mindset is always about Lisbon. It's a professional limitation. But can we find in Portugal the talent that we need? And of course, that, in my opinion, and that opinion was created by listening to many companies, and you just mentioned the same idea, that one of the key assets that Portugal have is talent, not just homegrown, which is very good, but we are a small country, so small numbers as well. But the ability to attract foreign investment, cross-border talent to relocate and live in Portugal, that has been mentioned. And in fact, Lisbon is very, as you know, I'm always trying to understand what's happening, and Lisbon has been frequently on the top of the best destination to live and work, the best location, the #1 destination for digital nomads and all that. So we have some ideas why that's happened. Maybe you can share with us. But my point here is what are these companies finding in Portugal regarding to the access of talent pools, local or cross-border, that they cannot find in other locations, because there are other locations with similar, with good conditions as well, but companies are coming here because of talent. What you already mentioned some issues, mm-hmm. The language skills, the good education, but what do you think are bringing companies to Portugal for the talent?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So it's a collection. Obviously, we've been blessed with a very interesting location in the world, really interesting climate and all of that, and that always helps. It's not something that we've built. We just got, well, I guess, lucky to be born here. But indeed, that does help. And you are right. Like Portugal, for a lot of years now, is recognized as a top destination for tourism, right? And that has meant that we've been building for a lot of years now a community of expats that live in the country, that love living in the country. With the increase of the nomadic lifestyle and the knowledge workers that can work anywhere with a laptop and internet, and we do have good internet in Portugal also, which is also important. That means that, well, some of them also start discovering Portugal. Obviously, there is more interesting, potentially more interesting, more exotic locations elsewhere in the world. I'm thinking there's a lot of places in Asia, for instance, they're also considered nomad paradise, but it's kind of a different proposition, right? One thing is to be in Asia, another thing is to be in Europe. So it's quite different, right? Obviously, everyone needs to decide what is best for their life and their career. But within Europe, again, it's somewhat of a more calm way of life. It can be fairly peaceful. If you either Lisbon or just outside Lisbon, 1 hour drive, you can be close to beautiful beaches, but obviously Porto and the south, Algarve, a lot of great locations that you can live with really, really good quality of life. And that ability to attract digital nomads, to attract talent, that they can live other more cloudy locations for our more sunny one, it's key. It builds that talent pool, right? So when people come, again, good education together with people coming and staying. And you know what is interesting? I'm just remembering one thing that was, this is probably information on social media, so I'm not doing any sort of inconfidence here, but it was super fun at some point when I was reading some discussion, you know, how Twitter threads sometimes can be, that someone was telling that, why don't you go to other countries in North Europe instead of Portugal? This was to a company that was opening office here. And what the CEO told was, well, true. Sometimes, honestly, it could even be a little bit easier regarding some laws or whatever other countries than Portugal. But I can convince people to go to Portugal. Really hard to convince people to go to other locations. So that is relevant. I cannot stress that enough. That's really relevant. And what we see, it is accelerating. Okay, as work becomes somewhat, the location becomes somewhat agnostic for a lot of these positions. This will only increase. It will not just be favoring Portugal, to be honest. Spain will probably gain also quite a fair bet of people relocating there. I'm biased, clearly, but what I do think Portugal has a lot of edge is particularly the language skills. It's more safe. If you look at, and I also had some interesting discussions with some colleagues and friends in Spain, and I was discussing, I don't see, besides a bigger local economy, obviously Spain is bigger than Portugal, but besides the bigger local economy, I don't necessarily see any key criteria where Spain is ahead of Portugal, not on security, not on political stability, not on English skills. So a lot of these things you don't necessarily have. So it feels to me a no-brainer that people choose Portugal. Now, I'm deviating a bit. Yeah.
Let me just add to that the market issue, which is true. Portugal, Spain is very large, of course, but I don't know if you share that experience with me, but most companies that are coming to Portugal, their main driver is not local market.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
So
no,
that,
no, absolutely, 100%. Yeah, they are not, and that's Portugal also has always understand that. I think, if I recall, that was talked on the meeting on Wednesday when talking about startups from Alexandre, that a lot of the startups in Portugal, when they start, they don't think locally, they don't think domestically, right? They need to think at least regional, at least Europe. Why? Because domestic market is not huge, which is, by the way, not being huge, it's still interesting for a particularly set of companies that want to run pilots or rollouts in a more controlled environment. Because one interesting thing, and I've learned this 10 years ago when I was teaching, and I need obviously to do research, prepare the classes and all of that. Portugal always had a very good adoption of technology, a personal level, right? So people started to use cell phones, even the digital banking, ours was pretty innovative decades ago. So Portuguese do adopt technology fairly fast. And so that could actually be interesting, the domestic market that is, for companies wanting to try things and have a rollout that is not exposing to, hundreds of millions of people immediately, but maybe just to a few millions. So that could still be interesting on the smaller size of the market. But indeed, companies come here, they don't think about, oh no, I'll make a killing by targeting just the Portuguese market. No, that's typically not on their mind. Absolutely. But so regarding talent, look, it's all about this. It's all about being good, and then there's also interesting things. Obviously, price arbitrage, right? That's relevant. Two important trends that we do see there. And I kind of mentioned that before, right? So Portugal will not be the cheapest, nor you should think of Portugal as the cheapest location in the world to hire talent, but it's still fairly affordable comparing to other locations, particularly with North America. If you compare salaries here with San Francisco, obviously they are ludicrous, right? It's a huge, huge difference. Again, hope this is not, I will not name names, so I think I can say this, but a customer was telling us the other day that they wanted to hire a senior engineer. Obviously, senior talented engineers are the hardest to get, obviously. And so they wanted to hire someone close to home in the United States, and they made an offer of close to $200,000 per year, which is, well, not necessarily super high in the US, but obviously it's fairly high for Portugal standards, right? And you know what happened? The guy did not accept it. Okay. So with the third of that money, they can hire very good people in Portugal. And the interesting thing is, because the market it's hot in terms of, there are a lot of companies that already uncover Portugal. They already found Portugal from a talent perspective. Obviously, it's much more hot now than it was 5 years ago, but it's still not as hot, obviously, clearly, as San Francisco and other locations, right? So people, it's not just about finding people, it's also about retaining them. That's also my perspective. If you look at turnover in tech companies, it could be even below 1 year, even on like Apple and Google, okay? In Portugal, you typically don't see that. If people are happy, they feel like they are making a reasonable amount of money, that is fair pay, right? That they are given the challenge, the autonomy, that they can thrive and feel they progress. Most of the times they will not leave the companies in 1 year. So it's also that, and that cost, the cost of hire and retain talent, right? It's not just finding them, it's also retain them. When they need to get new people, they need to retrain, they will lose momentum, right? Because someone needs to get familiar with the source code or whatever they are doing. So that's quite important as well. And I think it's yet another advantage to go to a market that is slightly less saturated. Because let's put it, although talent pool is not infinite, there is still an interesting opportunity in Portugal, which is, well, if you're a product company, a startup, fast growing startup with a very cool product, you have really good reasons, good motivators to attract talent, right? Sometimes that talent can be working in slightly less interesting projects on more commodity areas, telco or banking, which is necessary. Obviously, we all want our homemaking to work. But indeed, it could be slightly less challenging, technically speaking. So it's fairly easy to also poach those talents and get them to their business.
Okay, let me just make a quick reminder that you can participate through the chat box, and already we have some questions here that I will put on the table. I find it very interesting what you're saying, and I was wondering also if this situation with the COVID had any change in the hiring market to this in the tech sector because of this change. But I think even more interesting, these questions that we have here on the chat box that concern about if you think the salary in Portugal correspond to the high level of talented tech employees that we have, and what has been the evolution, companies coming to Portugal, what can they expect is in the future?
Well,
and also if you could add some thoughts about how the flow of talent across Europe could be improved. That
yes.
would be also
very good question. So first, salaries, right? That's really the $1 million question. Because the fact is, if you try to get statistical information about salaries in Portugal, is fairly difficult. A couple of reasons. Number one, just simply the size, right? When you obviously have more data points, more easy to get statistical significance in any studies you do. Number two, Portuguese, by, I guess, tradition and culture, don't like necessarily to talk a lot about what they make. And so that makes it a little bit harder to get data points. What we've found, and obviously something that we keep always an eye on, is two important things for people in the audience to be aware. Number one, there are some information out there. A lot of these times, this is self-reported information. What we feel is that that does not necessarily correspond to what we are seeing, to the truth. Particularly, well, again, I'll admit I'm somewhat biased because I'm kind of the customers we talk to on the top of the market. And what I mean by that is they want to hire not like the top 50%, they want to hire the top 10%, right? So they are willing to pay a little bit more and they want to get the best, right? So obviously they go a little bit higher in terms of salary as well. But what I can tell is for the type of quality, again, a lot of the companies, again, US, the UK, Ireland, Canada, that we work with, the salaries that we see sometimes on these online studies, they would be able to hire no one. So be careful about that. I think, again, it's part of being self-reported. It is also part of being people sometimes, you know, in Portugal, we also have probably the bad habit, but it is what it is, to do math on what we gain net in the bank, right? But obviously from an employee perspective, what matters is the total cost of employment, right? There's social security, there's you know, labor insurance, there's stuff that needs to be taken care of, right? So there's some disconnect there. However, salary. So we do see as well, they are increasing, by the way. Okay, clearly, that's what I feel. Particularly the more senior roles, they are increasing a little bit more. And the reason why that is easy to understand. It's opportunity access, right? So if 5 years ago, someone that has 8-9 years experience, really good senior developer or software architect or team lead, he kind of, if he wanted to stay in Portugal and not go to San Francisco, London, Dublin, whatever, he would need to probably accept a lower salary, right? And work for local companies. Now, if a lot of companies now have been hiring remotely, the same person now can work for any company almost in the world. And that will make him compete, not at the local level, but compete at the global level, okay? There's two important caveats with that is, first of all, you need to be able to compete. The talent needs to be able to compete in expertise, right? If you're competing globally, obviously you have much more competition, right? So you need to be good. You need to be that good. But if you are that good, you're also competing with them in salary, which means higher salaries, right? So that's important to recognize is to which level you are competing for talent. Are you competing locally? Are you competing globally? Okay, that's quite important. And we do see that change quite significantly. Now, the flow of talent across Europe, and moreover, a topic that I care deeply, Europe. I'm very pro-European, has always been. I believe deeply in the project, and I do think that we need more cohesion. Europe regarding not just tech, obviously we are kind of focusing a lot on tech, but not just tech, just work as a whole. For instance, it is still fairly complicated. Someone that, I don't know, originally from France or from Sweden or whatever, and they want to come work here. It's still very complicated to support that. First of all, they will need to get fiscal numbers, social security, all of that. They need to pay taxes and a discount, obviously, for the government locally, which is fair. People need to pay taxes, obviously, right? We need our healthcare and roads and all of that to work. But the thing is, you need to do that all again. And if you do plan to move to Portugal and stay in Portugal for 10, 20 years, that's fine, right? But if you're more of a nomadic person, and I do know that Portugal is trying also to create something interesting there, particular for nomads. But if you're more nomadic in nature and you probably stay 2 years in Lisbon, maybe 2 other years in, I don't know, in Spain, Barcelona, lovely city as well, you don't want to get start collecting fiscal numbers in every different country you go through, right? So that's a pain. So I feel we should have some level more of a support European careers, okay? I think that would be quite interesting. Obviously, a lot of countries that need to agree on something like that, but it would be interesting. Obviously, if you are on a country, you should pay tax on that country because you're also using the infrastructure of that country, but not just bureaucratic speaking. Don't need to go redo everything every time that you might want to relocate to another country. And that's actually probably one of the most common asks that we've been getting this year is actually people, both founders, but also senior folks that want to come back to Portugal, and they get in touch with us and we start helping them to understand what they need to understand, possible regarding visas, and tax, and incentives, and a lot of other stuff, how to get to Portugal and how to do things first well done, right, correctly, but also obviously more efficient, understand interesting places to live, and so much other stuff that we can help them with.
Mm-hmm. I think that we are at a moment, very interesting moment now, for that issue that you mentioned about coordinating in Europe to make better conditions for cross-border talents to move, because the first steps into this kind of coordination is being made, and very recently that was launched and created European standards for startups that has some rules about what the city needs to have to be a startup city, and there's a platform of communication on the startup ecosystem that is based here in Lisbon. It was a decision very recent, and I think that could be a very interesting forum to talk about this issue. I have also a question. You mentioned the nomad lifestyle and people. Oh, now I have more questions that I haven't read yet. So, but the one I will be brave and try to say the name. I hope I don't get it wrong. Katsinia Kurileva asked, from your experience, from contacts of what you heard, are international talent relocating to Portugal to work full-time for local companies or companies set up here, or do you think the main trend is rather a nomadic lifestyle, that they stay here for a few years and work from here, but not
from my
to local economy?
From my experience, to become full-time and stay here, I think that's clearly the norm. Unfortunately, there's something we haven't touched, and obviously it's clear, and I think it's on top of mind for everyone. We are seeing throughout the world, and the last few years have been particularly negative, to seeing some autocratic movements and nationalism movements in some countries. And so we are still very blessed that our Portuguese landscape is fairly stable. Not perfect, none is, but still very stable, welcoming to people. We have none of that, unfortunately. Some things that we hear from other countries regarding not being welcoming. And so a lot of people choose Portugal, not just to spend 2 years because it's sunny, to actually relocate with family because it's safer, it's political stable. So if I need to pick one, clearly to be full-time employees, to have a career here, have a base here, even if then they travel from here, obviously, right? Not now, stay home still, but when it's safe. But much more than that, than necessarily being nomadic. But it is still a good spot, obviously, but I feel it's a lot more as a stable, secure base than anything else.
I would add to that a statistic that I always find very interesting, that I see at the Internations. Internations is an international association of expats. They have members all over the world, hundreds of thousands of members. They do a big survey every year with many questions. And one of the questions I like the most is, you are an expat, are you planning to go home one day, or are you planning to stay where you are forever? And Portugal and Lisbon is always on the top of on the top 5 of the expats that are not planning to return. They are here to stay. They really like to be here, and I think that's very good indicator that I always enjoy. And that matches with another one that's not statistical. Is something I heard, that there are lots of diplomatic staff from all over the world that decide to stay here after they finish their missions. When they retire, they move to Portugal because they experience many countries all over their career, and in the end they decide to move here, which I think is very flattering, and I
agree. It's
a very vain about it.
Yes, indeed. It's one of the things I love the most about what I do daily, is talking about people that choose our country and they are very happy with that. Like it warms my heart, right, to hear that.
Now I have here a difficult question from Bridgin for me, which I think is it's terrible, about the investment, foreign investment, percentage of foreign investment in Lisbon, focusing on startups and targeting startup ecosystem. I don't know the number. I'm sure that exists. I know that the startup ecosystem in Portugal is growing a lot in the last few years, and the government's national government for Portugal had put an objective of having I'm not talking about investment. I'm talking about the contribution to the GDP of Portugal from the startup ecosystem. Had put an objective of reaching at least 2% of GDP coming from startup ecosystem, which is a very interesting objective, because it's not just put the objective and wait it to happen. After following it, there's a lot of programs and incentives to reach it, which I think is very interesting. We had a very interesting talk about investment in the startup ecosystem with Alexandre from Faber Ventures. Is on YouTube. I think it's very important, very, very interesting. The number of investors looking at the startup ecosystem is growing a lot, and I have this number in my head. I have terrible memory, so it's probably wrong, but it's something about 400 million in investment that was raised by startups located here in Portugal, not only Portuguese founders, because our ecosystem is very international. It has a lot of nationalities, but startups here that have raised around 400 million or more, probably wrong number, but I will look the real number and send it to you if it's important.
Yeah,
I think.
Let me take that while you're talking. A few things that came to mind that we haven't mentioned and might be interesting here to talk in the last few minutes. So one of them is another trend we see quite a bit, and this is again something that will resonate quite well with anyone that has a tech startup. With the early stages are obviously always very hard. You need to bootstrap. You need to do a lot with little. And what we see that as a little bit of a trend within Europe, that feels mostly within Europe. We don't see necessarily a lot of companies from, other continents to come here to bootstrap here, but we do see from Europe. And the reason is cost again. So it's even if the cost of talent is kind of still cheaper, but still kind of averaging and becoming somewhat the same, particularly again, that idea when you're competing globally, the cost of living, it is still fairly lower, right? So when you are a founder, you have a team of co-founders, and you need to live in a country, you need to eat, you need to live in a place, right? Portugal, it will be much cheaper than the Netherlands, than other countries, right? So that's an important trend we see as well.
Sorry, just adding, Alexandre mentioned that as well. He said that same amount of money will buy much more here in Portugal than and other locations. So it's very cost effective.
Absolutely. You actually decrease the risk of going down as a business because the money lasts for longer, right? So you have more time to get to the next stage. So absolutely, I recall that from Alexandre. That's what I want to reiterate that. And then the second thing I believe is also important and we haven't mentioned today is you're talking about how Portugal is welcoming, right? The government, the focus, we've seen a lot of initiatives. Miguel talked about Hub Criativo do Beato, which is obviously important. I recall talking with someone about a framework. I don't know if it's already defined or is still being kind of defined, but the framework also to foster innovation. I can't recall the name again. Also have bad memory, but it's like a special area where it's specially dedicated to do things with like blockchain and maybe self-driving cars. I know I think they are doing something, not in Lisbon, that Diogo, but I think something in Porto. I can't recall the name, but the idea is to have a light framework for experimentation. So again, it's great to see that.
I'm not getting competitive here, but I think we have also in Lisbon.
Okay.
It's under the Lisbon Robotics program. It's a program in Lisbon called Lisbon Robotics, and they have many different options. And I think there's one. There's another thing which is called the Sandbox, which is a regulatory freehold for you to experiment without having problems with regulations to experiment technology. Not that's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
But I'm talking about.
Yeah, but I was actually
pilots.
referring to that Sandbox because
Okay.
you know that Europe, obviously, it's much more regulated, which is good for consumers, right? Namely GDPR and all, but sometimes can impair a bit startup, right? Because that mantra that you hear from San Francisco, move fast and break stuff, in Europe is not necessarily like that. But it is great that the government, and this is the Portuguese government, right, recognizes that and creates this somewhat sandbox environment where you can, it's not act without supervision, but in sometimes the legislators obviously takes a little bit longer to create the laws for new stuff, emergency.
Yeah,
obviously it's natural. It'll be always like that in every country of the world. So at least you know that you are in a controlled environment where you can experiment. Obviously laws will follow, but it needs to make sense. But that sort of being welcoming, it's quite relevant in Portugal, and that extends also to another important aspect, which is anyone that is in the EU, obviously easy to get to Portugal, but anyone that it isn't, they will need visas, right? And so that's also important. Portugal has a ton of different options, pretty much catering for any needs from sometimes what is spoken a lot, golden visa for investors, but more interesting probably the startup visa for entrepreneurs, the tech visa for highly skilled workers, the own income visa for people that have like capital gains, or they have just a sustainable means of income. So it is fairly simple to get into the country, particularly if you want to do stuff, you are qualified, and all of that. And then we also have, which I'm jealous that I can't use, but we also have a very special tax regime called the non-habitual resident, which does help tremendously. Anyone that relocates here and has not been a tax resident on the last 5 years can get a very special and interesting tax on income. So yet another way to show how welcoming the Portuguese government is and really wants to have these people coming to our country.
Okay, thank you. Let me just ask one last question, and that's very, very selfish question because I'm very interested in learning your opinion. That is the following: with the COVID forced companies to adapt to lockdown and limited mobility. That's known, and distance working has become the new normality, as some people say. My question is, one, do you think after all this mess is over, that what will be the landscape about the distance working? Do you think it's here to stay, or it will be a different version, or how it will be? And the second, and that's the part I'm very interested.
Okay.
Will it affect the company's location criteria in the future? In other words, companies want to be close to their talent. Will they still want? Will it still be important for companies to set up their offices near the talent, even if the talent can work effectively remotely? Or do you think there's going to be a change in the criteria for locating companies?
Those are great questions to end on because I love talking about that. I'll try to be brief though, but we've given a lot of thoughts, and that is particular what I like talking about. Because again, having worked with the international companies, have built and see different teams working across different geographies, more on the traditional, hubs as we did previously, but also on the fully distributed mode where you have teams, one can in each country, and they can be nomadic and doesn't really matter. Having seen all of that and managing teams, all of that, and for a few years, okay. So when the pandemic started, I had managed distributed teams for 4 years already. Okay, so I have somewhat of a leg start. Obviously, there are other folks that have similar experiences, but I look with much interest, not obviously to the pandemic unfolding, but to the impacts on the work and work organization and the corporate organization about locations. My personal belief and feeling, and I'm so confident about this that we are betting the bridge in future on it. So it's really a strong opinion. So my belief is work will be more decentralized. I focus a lot on efficiency. Okay, in efficiency, if you look at work of a knowledge worker and think efficiency, first thing is you need to recognize that probably the work has a dual nature. Okay, there is the type of work that is done deep work mode, individual work, where someone either needs to code or someone, I don't know, needs to write blog posts, or someone needs to go do the crunch the numbers on financial, whatever. It's individual work. You don't need to be sitting next to anyone to do that. But then you have the other side, which is the collaborative work. Nobody lives isolated, right? We work in teams. We work with colleagues. We need to brainstorm ideas. We need to design technical solutions. We need to discuss marketing campaigns, right? And that work, obviously, if it's collaborative work, will always be better done face-to-face. There's no question about it. Might not be safe today, sure, but there, efficiently speaking, it will always be more efficient collaborating. And what collaboration close, nearby, face-to-face also adds is team spirit, is cohesion, right? It is very, not impossible, but very, very, very hard to build a good culture and build a team where each individual feel they belong to a team and they want to help their colleagues if everyone is remote and never met. Okay, so for me, thinking about what is efficient for organizations, I see it as not fully centralized in big office as sometimes were in the past, but also not fully distributed as we sometimes saw some people talking about would be the new norm. I think it is somewhere in the middle. So I think about teams, okay, because that's the unit that you interact the most with. You have your individual work, but then when you work collaboratively, you work typically within a team. So I'm a strong believer that those teams should be co-located. And by co-location, I mean not necessarily commuting every day to an office, but have some affinity to a location, you know, where you can go to regularly, right? So let's go with Lisbon. We've been talking about Lisbon, obviously, a lot.
For example. Good example.
So maybe you have, like, I don't know, a co-working space, maybe you have a small office where you go Mondays to do the planning for the week, and then people can go work from home, stay on the office, go work to the beach, whatever, right? But collaborative on a location, you can go for lunch afterwards, you build that team spirit. Maybe on Fridays you do the weekly review and you go for beers afterwards. We can go for beers again. So I feel that's really important. And just to wrap that up with the company perspective, companies need, if there is any sort of talent war, and there is for tech, companies need to go where the talent is, right? It's not supporting them from, oh, I'm a company from, so let's go with San Francisco again, right? It's kind of the Mecca. I'm a company from San Francisco and I have a few, 3, 4, 5 software engineers in Portugal, but I have nothing there, right? They are on their own. That doesn't seem to me like a great plan. The company should go to where the employees are and provide local assistance and support. And that's the way you build great culture, right? Because people have the sense of belonging. And if the pandemic told us anything, is that we are social beings and we need the sense of belonging, right? So it's no fun being working all alone at our houses.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. I think we are at the last minute of our time. I don't know if Ireland wants to add anything. Thank you very much, Pedro. Honestly, very good conversation. I enjoy it very much. I hope you all have at home. I don't know if Arnold wants to add any remarks or anything about future events from the network.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was a really, really good conversation. Thank you both very much. Lots of great information and knowledge there. So thank you again. Yeah, no, that concludes series of investing and hiring in Portugal. So just wanted to thank you all again, all the delegates who participated today, and you, Pedro and Diogo. And for the next activities, like Diogo mentioned, just keep visiting our websites. You will have all the information there. But for now, that's it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Right, really. Thanks everyone.
See you next time.
Thank you very much.